Now this house here has been empty.
I never figured I would be in this situation.
The house here.
When we purchased our home, we were making over $100,000 a year. Now we're lucky to make $50,000.
You can't keep your home if you don't have a job.
It's just so overwhelming.
From Michigan Radio, this is Foreclosing on the American Dream. I'm Christina Shockley.
Literally, these banks and other financial institutions lost their minds in terms of lending money to people to buy a home who really had no ability to pay off the loan.
Across the state, thousands of people are losing their homes to foreclosure. In the next hour, we'll explore why this is happening and how it's affecting our communities, our state, and all of us. We'll hear how people are trying to keep their neighborhoods viable. And we'll understand the emotional stories behind foreclosure, the ones that get buried beneath the headlines.
This is ripping my whole family apart.
The news is next. From Michigan Radio, this is Foreclosing on the American Dream. I'm Christina Shockley. For the past 2.5 years, Michigan has had one of the highest foreclosure rates in the nation. That's not all. We've had the highest annual average unemployment rate during that time. This has meant that many people are in a financial tailspin that can seem hard to get out of.
You can't keep your home
It's
if you don't have a job.
To go from A1 credit to feeling like you're a failure.
It's hard to even put it into words. It's just so
you grow up a
overwhelming.
lot faster when you
Stress
have
is
to
the
deal with
first
something
thing.
like
A lot
that.
of homeowners will break down. They'll cry.
My name is Debbie Gillum, and I'm losing my home in another month, just due to foreclosure. I lost a job several years ago. Unfortunately, this is ripping my whole family apart because I'm going to be moving in with my mother. My son and my daughter are going to move in with their dad, which is not the most appealing of ideas for any of us, but he's already got his sister and her 2 kids living with him, who also went through foreclosure recently. So it's hit home for them too. A couple years ago, you rarely even seen a house for sale. People move into this street and in this area, they stay. But right now there's 2, I think actually the third one just went up. 3 other, not including my house, other homes in foreclosure on this street alone. And that's the same any neighborhood you drive through right now. I mean, it's just bad. And I never thought I'd be in this position. I just don't know what to do. I'm just trying to take it day by day and just keep plugging away, looking for jobs. But I'm at a crossroads in so many areas of my life right now. It's just, I've poured my heart and soul into this house, doing all the work myself, you know. Like I said, I've never hired an electrician, never hired a plumber. Every fixture in this house you see, I installed. The flooring I installed, the walls I've painted. You don't know how many hours it takes to do this kind of a finish on the walls, but I've got it. The yard alone is a ton of maintenance. I've planted that tree out front. You know, I've done so much. And just and the worst part is going to be moving in with my mother down the street, having to drive by this house every single day. And first of all, when it's listed as a foreclosure, seeing it go into complete disrepair because the yard's probably going to get out of control and before anybody takes care of it. And then when somebody does move in, just seeing someone else in your home, you know, it's going to be hard. I got this small ray of hope that even if that worst case scenario comes to that point and somebody gets this house, I just pray that it's just like a first home for them. In 3 or 4 or 5 years, they're going to want to move up to something bigger. And I'll be right at the door saying, I'm your buyer. I want this house back someday. So I keep holding on to that ray of hope.
Debbie Gillum expects to be out of her house by the end of August. At what point does having a little trouble paying the bills turn into losing your house? Dustin Dwyer takes a look at how the foreclosure process actually works.
If you want the short answer of how a foreclosure actually happens, talk to an expert. Someone like Tracy Kaufman. She's a financial counselor for Home Repair Services. It's a nonprofit in Grand Rapids that helps people facing foreclosure. Kaufman says if you start to fall behind on your mortgage payments, there's a general timeline that kicks in.
You fall 1 month behind and you get phone calls and letters. 2 months behind, you get more serious phone calls and letters. At the end of the 2 months, beginning of 3 months, you generally will get a letter saying you have 30 to 45 days to bring this account current, or else we will begin your foreclosure. That's called your demand letter. So then, end of 3 months, beginning of 4 months, that demand letter is expiring, and the mortgage company can refer you to their attorneys to begin the foreclosure process.
And the actual foreclosure process is only about 4 weeks long. Those attorneys will schedule what's called a sheriff's sale. Basically, it's the auction where your house will be sold, and you have until the date of that sale to save your home. Of course, it's not that simple.
Be careful on the stairs, because when you get down to this one, when I come down here in the dark sometimes...
Kathy Carruthers leads the way to her new home south of Grand Rapids. It's in her friend's basement, a single room with a small storage area, and space enough for a TV and 2 brown couches just across from the laundry room. It's not as nice as her old place.
I bought a home in 2001 when I had a good job that I'd been at for several years, and I lost that job at the end of 2004. And I didn't worry. I'll get it. I always worked my whole life, so I just figured I'll get another job. And it didn't happen.
Carruthers was able to get by for a few years on unemployment, temporary work, and by digging into her retirement account. By 2006, she realized this plan wouldn't last, so she did what everyone's been told to do when facing the prospect of foreclosure. She called her mortgage company. She called early, before she even missed her first payment. But she says you can't just dial up the mortgage company and get help from the first person who answers.
When you're calling and you get to the point where you're in a crisis and you need to work out some kind of a solution, you don't want customer service, you want loss mitigation. That's who you need to keep pursuing until you get them. Because the other people really can't do it. They can make notes and, make a record that you called, but they don't do anything.
This is one area where it's good to have a professional counselor who can help navigate the system. Tracy Kaufman was Carruthers' counselor, and Kaufman says often what a counselor does is sit on the phone, get put on hold, get transferred, all of the most frustrating stuff. Kaufman says in some ways it's almost harder to get help these days than it used to be.
Mortgage companies are much more willing to work with us and talk with us and negotiate with the homeowners. The only downside to that is because so many people are seeking those workouts with the mortgage companies, those departments of the mortgage companies have become quite backlogged.
But once you break through, usually the first step is to try to get what's called a special forbearance. It's basically an agreement that the lender will give you some extra time to catch up on your payments. Kathy Carruthers was denied special forbearance because she had no income. So the next step was to see if she could sell her house off cheap. Here again, Kaufman says current conditions make that difficult.
There's just a lot of houses on the market, a lot of houses selling for less than what they owe. So avoiding the foreclosure via sale has become more difficult at this point.
For Carruthers, once the sale option failed, there was only one other option. She signed over her deed in lieu of foreclosure. This option looks slightly better on her credit report than an actual foreclosure, and the mortgage company is happy because it involves less hassle for them. But the basic end result is the same. Kathy Carruthers lost her home, and there are thousands more like her in Michigan. In Grand Rapids, I'm Dustin Dwyer.
Now, what about the bigger picture? What has led to the booming rate of foreclosures?
Literally, these banks and other financial institutions lost their minds in terms of lending money to people to buy a home who really had no ability to pay out the loan.
Don Grimes is a senior research specialist for the Institute for Research on Labor, Employment, and the Economy at the University of Michigan. Don, why are there so many foreclosures in Michigan?
Essentially, credit was made available too easily to people who were poor credit risks. And that is the root cause of the foreclosure problem. And that's going to cause huge problems for the people who are losing their homes. They didn't either understand or they didn't appreciate the fact that they were going to have to pay those loans back. And so take someone who 3 or 4 years ago, you have a person who went out and bought a home, They didn't really have the income to support the home, but they believed prices were going to continue to go up. And in some cases, some of the mortgage brokers were saying, well, when the prices go up, we'll refinance and you'll be able to afford it. It's not really true, but people were able to sell them on that. So people bought a home that they could not afford on the expectation that prices are going to continue to go up. And you had another group of people who, when their homes went up in value, they went out and refinanced their mortgage. This is very common among elderly people who are now losing their homes to foreclosure. They had lived in these homes for 20 years, 15, 20 years, but the home value went up. Somebody was telling them they can go take some cash out, go on a vacation, buy a new car, and they did. A little bit of slick salesmanship because all of the mortgage brokers got paid on commission, and so they were encouraging people to take out these loans when they probably shouldn't have, but the people did sign on the line, and they did get the money. And so they spent the money, and now they have to pay the loan back.
Why did lenders supply people with loans that they couldn't afford?
That's a good question, and someone should ask them. I suspect it was because the models, and this goes to some of my friends in economics and in mathematics, built up a model that said they're not going to have this huge price decline, so people are not all going to default, and therefore we can trust that the market will keep home prices high enough that the number of people defaulting on their mortgages will be small enough that we can absorb it in the additional interest rate that they pay. Problem is that once house prices started going down, huge numbers of people, much more than the models ever predicted, said, we're not going to pay this loan back, we can't pay this loan back. And so you have this huge default risk. So all these financial institutions are taking a huge hit right now.
What do you think people don't understand about this crisis?
You know, I'm an economist, a relatively financially savvy person. But when you go in and take out a mortgage, you go through and sign hundreds of pages of documents. You just sign here, and somebody says, oh, well, we'll take care of it. Sign here, sign here, sign here, initial here, sign here. And I think people just did it without really thinking about what they were signing. And I think there's also a belief, well, these people are a lot smarter than I am, and if they will loan me money, they must think I'm a good enough risk at being able to pay it back. So you sort of trusted their judgment in lending you the money, and you just sort of said, okay, if they think I can pay it back, then I must be able to pay it back.
It sounds like, in a way, people just weren't very responsible.
Actually, that's correct. There were a lot of people who bet the house, literally, on an optimistic outcome for house prices, even though anybody who looked at the numbers seriously knew that house prices had to come back down because they were so far above the equilibrium value that's tied to the income, the ability of people shown for 50 or 60 years to buy those homes. And so things got crazy. It was like the stock market bubble when everybody was buying these internet stocks in the late 1990s, and the brokers were selling them saying, well, yeah, they don't make any profit, but, that's an old metric. Don't count on that. They'll still go up tomorrow. Well, eventually that bubble burst, and all the people who bought internet stocks in the late 1990s went from 200 to 10.
Well, Don Grimes, thank you very much for helping us figure all of this out.
Oh, you're welcome.
Don Grimes is an economist at the University of Michigan. Coming up.
If you haven't lost your job, if there's not a divorce, if there's not something going on in your world, your house should not be on the market right now.
What the foreclosure crisis means for the housing market in about 5 minutes. This is Foreclosing on the American Dream from Michigan Radio. From Michigan Radio, this is Foreclosing on the American Dream. I'm Christina Shockley. From January of 2006 to June of 2008, more than 106,000 homes were lost to foreclosure in Michigan. What we don't know is where the people who lived in those homes went after they moved out. That's just not something demographers track. Anecdotally, we can tell you that after foreclosure, most people move in with family members or friends or rent a place to live. A small percentage become homeless. In some cases, people need to move out of the state to find work. And neighborhoods are left with homes that sit empty, like in Thelma Razia Curtis's neighborhood.
Now, this house here has been empty for quite a long time. I don't know what's wrong with it. The house here used to have a really nice garden and a lot going on, and I don't know what's happening with it right now. How you doing?
How's it going?
Are most of the houses on this block filled up? Or are there any that are vacant?
Yeah, it's vacant. They're going vacant now.
Yeah, we're concerned. I live on the next block. I'm Miss Curtis. And we don't want this area, our homes to just go down the drain. And trying to cut down on the number of vacant houses. We've had some incidents, in the neighborhood where children were hurt, dragged into vacant houses. So, trying to get some help. In fact, we're working on a moratorium on foreclosures. Because there's too many good people losing their homes right now. And you can't keep your home if you don't have a job.
Right.
Yeah.
That was Thelma Razia Curtis giving us a sense of how foreclosure has affected her neighborhood in northwest Detroit. Foreclosures don't just hurt the owners who lose their homes. Foreclosures ripple through neighborhoods and force down the price of every home that's being sold. Tracy Samilton visited Jackson, where one homeowner has stopped trying to break even on the sale of her house.
It's 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths.
Jamie Glanz went house shopping in Jackson in 2004 and fell in love with this pristine ranch home on Higbee Street. It's a gorgeous neighborhood, it's quiet, the school district is good, and it's a few minutes' drive to all the conveniences of downtown Jackson.
I have a very nice fireplace right there in the living room, and I really like the window here. That was one of the first things that I really liked about the house, the little bay window.
As happy as Glanz is with her home, she has to sell it. She married last year and has moved into her husband's home in Ohio. There's nothing not to like about her house, but it isn't selling. It's listed for $174,900, $22,000 less than she paid for it.
My house has been on the market since last June. I listed it not asking, I wasn't looking to make a bunch of money. I was pretty much just looking to break even. And since then, you just keep dropping the price. And it's hard to get people to come and look, and then when they do look, they go and find a foreclosed house that the bank is going to give them dirt cheap.
Glanz's real estate agent is Deanne Gumbert. I meet her a few streets away outside another nice home in another nice neighborhood. The previous owners lost the house through foreclosure after making expensive improvements with a home equity line of credit.
So before they left, they took out the furnace and the water heater and the kitchen and the bathroom and the French door, and everything they could take, they took.
Gumbert was the agent for an investor who bought the home for $48,000, a fraction of its former worth. Gumbert says this is what makes the current housing market a bad time to sell.
If you're going to put your house on the market, I need to know why you're going to put your house on the market. Because if you haven't lost your job, if there's not a divorce, if there's not something going on in your world, your house should not be on the market right now. And the reason it shouldn't be is because the market is saturated with foreclosures. Real sellers can't compete against bank foreclosures.
Not only can't they compete, but foreclosures are now causing even more foreclosures. Dan Immergluck is a housing policy researcher at Georgia Tech University. He says the housing market is in a vicious cycle. Each foreclosure can depress the whole neighborhood's housing values by 5% or more. That forces home values down, often below what homeowners owe. One job loss, and they can land in foreclosure too.
Whether you blame the lenders or the regulators or the borrowers, we got to get beyond that. We got to get to the point of we need to stabilize the economy I don't think people realize how severe it is.
Banks are now getting out of the mortgage business. That makes the crisis worse. Some of the people who might be interested in buying, say, a nice house on Higbee Street in Jackson, they can't get a loan right now. Immer Gluck says the Federal Housing Administration should be riding to the rescue. FHA loans comprise about 10% of home loans right now.
I would set a goal that the FHA should think about going back to making 30 to 40% of the home purchase loans in the country.
Immer Gluck is worried that the crisis is going to get worse and worse unless the FHA acts. But real estate agent Deanne Gumbert is more optimistic. 6 months ago, she admits it was hard to get up in the morning just to attend yet another depressing foreclosure sale. But she says banks are much more willing now to agree to a short sale where the owners sell the house for less than they owe and the difference is forgiven. She says investors are snapping up foreclosures and renovating them, and it's summer. Regular home buyers are getting off the fence.
My business has exploded in the last 2 months. I can't keep up right now. And I work with real sellers with real mortgages and real reasons to move. And I mean, the offers are coming and they're difficult to negotiate now, but the properties are moving.
Meanwhile, 3 open houses later, Jamie Glanz is still waiting for an offer. The last foreclosure in her neighborhood is off the market, so she hopes she'll get that offer any day. In Jackson, I'm Tracy Hamilton.
As we heard, foreclosures bring down the value of every house in the neighborhood. And with lower property values come decreased tax revenues. Charlie Ballard is a professor of economics at Michigan State University. Charlie, how much is the foreclosure crisis affecting local government coffers?
From about 2002 to 2005, all across the country, and indeed in Michigan, local government budgets were buoyed because property values were rising rapidly, and you got more property tax revenues. That turned around, flattened in 2006, and it has now turned around in the last 2 years. And so that has had a substantial downward effect for the revenues of cities and counties and townships.
So what kind of things are governments having a hard time paying for?
Well, it varies from community to community, but in some cases you've got cutbacks in the funding for local parks and public works. For instance, in East Lansing, where I live, the budget for tree trimming on public property and tree removal of dead trees and so on has been cut, and they are way behind schedule in some of their maintenance. So there's quite a wide variety, and in some cases you have fewer police patrols, fewer firefighters. And one of the biggest that I notice is the roads, because a lot of our road repair and construction is done by county road commissions, and the county governments are stressed. They not only have the reduced property tax revenue, but they also have the increases in all of their fuel costs and everything.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Charlie Ballard is an economist at Michigan State University. Foreclosures touch all of us. You even hear the stories standing around the office water cooler. Kathy Augusta is my colleague at Michigan Radio. She told me what happened when she was looking to buy a house.
There was one property I was insisting on taking a look at. Price was excellent. It was bank-owned, or in some phase of the foreclosure process. I'm not quite certain. But at any rate, we finally went into the property, walked in, came around the corner into what was, I guess, the dining area, looked up on the wall, and on there was scrawled in spray paint, "Do not take my house away. Do not steal my house. If you take my house, I will kill you." Of course, we were both shocked. It was a pretty sobering experience, and up until that point in time, I was pretty gung-ho on looking at foreclosures. I have to say, ever since then, I've stopped looking at them. I can't buy into somebody else's loss.
Kathy Augusta lives in Ann Arbor.
They came and took it. Now I only have a memory of what I was creating. Everything is gone.
That's what was printed on one side of a postcard that reporter Jennifer Guerra got in the mail. On the other side was a photograph of a lawn, a for sale sign, and a front door to a house. The postcard had no return address or contact information, but it did have the words installation located at 0 East Breckenridge, Ferndale, Michigan. Jennifer was intrigued, so she decided to investigate.
Don't waste your time driving to 0 East Breckenridge in Ferndale. I did, and there's nothing there. No installation whatsoever, just a whole lot of nothing, which apparently is the point.
The actual installation work is no longer there.
And why isn't it there?
Because at some point the property was foreclosed on.
It seems even artwork isn't immune to the foreclosure crisis. But unlike most foreclosures in the state, James Hadrill says at least this one was planned. Hadrill is the artist behind the foreclosed upon art installation. Here's the backstory. In addition to being an artist, Hadrill used to work for a real estate company. So when one of his vacant lots went into foreclosure, he decided to build a kind of mini house on it and stick a for sale sign in front. The mini house was just that. It was no bigger than a closet, and it was made up of 3 walls and a front door.
It conveys the idea of some form of shelter, not necessarily a full-blown home, but something that it may be a child's idea of a shelter.
Hadrill built the child-sized fort out of reclaimed wood and siding, all of which he took from a foreclosed home his family had bought. Then he filled the inside of the fort with photos of drawings and doodles and paintings by kids. When Hadrill worked at the real estate company, part of his job was to walk through foreclosed homes and take pictures. Here he is at his studio, flipping through a pile of photos he's taken over the last couple of years.
This particular one is in like a teenager's room, and obviously their home was getting foreclosed on, and they wrote on the wall, "I'll miss my home. Nothing new could ever replace this. Treat it well, newcomers. This place was loved. Buy home." Which is kind of just heart-wrenching as far as what this person was going through.
The toys left behind, the drawings taped up and then forgotten on refrigerator doors, all of it got Hadrill thinking about what it's like for a kid whose parents go through foreclosure. Things like, how do they feel? Do they know what's going on? Do they even understand why they have to all of a sudden pack up and leave their home?
We hear all about the financial repercussions of the credit crisis or foreclosure crisis, but we don't hear a lot about what the impact that's going to have on younger generations. I mean, I don't think we really teach children that much about financial responsibility or how to balance a checkbook. I think that's just something we absorb from our parents, and if this is kind of the precedent we're setting, where is that going to kind of lead us in the future?
James Hadrill doesn't pretend to have any answers, but he thinks his art installation, the one that was foreclosed on, and the remaining postcard, well, they can at least start a discussion and get people thinking. At least that's what it did for Hadrill. Even though he staged the entire thing, from the vacant lot to the for sale sign to the mini house, to see it just one day disappear.
So you're kind of like, you're struck, like, oh my gosh, I knew this process was happening, but I didn't realize it would happen this quickly, and I have really no say whatsoever.
Now imagine, if Hadrill was that upset by a foreclosure he had staged, imagine what it must feel like for a child who really has no say at all. So maybe it wouldn't hurt to drive by 0 East Breckenridge in Ferndale. When you get there, look for the tiny, child-sized fort with a for sale sign in front. And when it's not there, think about what it must feel like for a child to lose his home. And then think about how you'd explain to that child why he had to lose his home in the first place. I'm Jennifer Guerra.
You can't keep your home
It's
if you don't have a job.
To go from A1 credit to feeling like you're a failure.
It's hard to even put it into words. It's just so
You grow up a
overwhelming.
lot faster when you
Stress
have
is
to
the
deal with
first
something
thing.
like
A lot
that.
of homeowners will break down, they'll cry.
I'm Ted Huff.
I'm Kate Huff. I'm 18. I guess I didn't really know what was going on until my sister told me that we were gonna get evicted, and then I kind of panicked. It was scary, and I didn't really know it was that bad. Dad likes to sugarcoat things a lot and not say the whole truth. And so I think for a good while he would just not tell me what was going on.
Well,
Looking back at it now, I know Kate says it was all sugar-coated, and I guess I tried to sugarcoat things when I talked to Kate, just to keep it more in a positive, upbeat, manner, just because I didn't want her to freak out, because I was freaking out, because I was still struggling with trying to figure out everything that was going on.
I really felt like for a while that I couldn't really talk to him about, because when I started talking to him about how I was feeling about it, it always become about, like, how he was feeling about it. Like, I don't want to, like, hurt your feelings.
Oh, that's fine.
But yeah, it would just become always about, like, how they were feeling. And it's just like, no, like, can you just try to, like, listen to how I'm feeling for once right now? Like, I'm in high school, and I have to leave the house. My last year of high school, like, I wish it just could have happened, like, the year after when I left, like. But, yeah, it's just, like, really hard for parents to, like, pay attention to how their kids are feeling because they're so overwhelmed on their own.
But Kate's right. I mean, when you are in the thick of it and whatnot, looking back, I wish we could have had more heart-to-hearts about what was going on. But with my head swimming with everything that's going on, and you're desperately trying to figure out how can you make this, work, and, you just feel like such a failure, like you didn't provide a home, a roof over your kids, and so there's a lot of, sad denial of, I guess I'm just searching for the words. It's hard to even put it into words. It's just so overwhelming.
I don't know. You grow up a lot faster when you have to deal with something like that. And now I have this, like, urge to become successful. Like, I don't ever want to be in the position to have to do that to my kids. I don't ever want to have to pull them from their house because I know how hard it is. And so I learned you just got to make smart choices and really keep yourself organized so that doesn't happen. Like, I don't want that to happen.
Kate Huff and her father, Ted, live in Ypsilanti.
I'm Jack Lissenberry. Some years ago, I helped organize a conference that was designed to define the American dream. No two people agreed exactly what the dream was or should be. But one thing nearly everyone agreed was that the American dream included owning your own home. That was something made possible for most of us by the lending industry and by the federal income tax mortgage deduction. A teacher once told me that the deduction was enacted after World War II. Congress wanted to spur the building industry and make it possible for veterans to own their own homes. That made a lot of sense. So imagine my surprise when I did some research last year and learned that wasn't true at all. The mortgage deduction has existed since the income tax itself started in 1913. That excited my curiosity. As this year's foreclosure crisis began to worsen, I began to wonder, what was the mortgage industry like at the time of the Great Depression? I looked into this and got a shock. The mortgage world in 1929 looked uncomfortably like the subprime lending world of the last few years. Lending up till then was highly unregulated. The law of the jungle prevailed. Most mortgages were for very short periods of time, 3 to 5 years, and the buyer never paid on the principal. Borrowers only paid the interest, and then a big balloon payment for the entire amount was due at the end, which usually meant they had to either get another mortgage or lose the house. Plus, they usually had to renegotiate the interest rate every few months. It was sort of the adjustable rate mortgage from hell. When the Depression started, lenders immediately jacked up the interest rates, and a lot of folks lost their houses. During 1932 alone, 10% of all mortgages were in foreclosure. The New Deal sought to fix this by establishing agencies to encourage, oversee, and regulate the home mortgage market. Some incentives were offered to veterans, and for half a century, we had a relatively stable and safe path to home ownership that was designed to create a strong middle class. And then we managed to screw it up through deregulation, ideology, and greed. Fixing the blame isn't especially interesting. What we need to do is fix the problem. If we look at the history of these loans and what worked, it shouldn't be that hard to find a way.
Jack Lessenberry is Michigan Radio's senior political analyst. Coming up, neighbors step in to keep empty homes from looking that way.
We even went in and put shades at all the windows. Unfortunately, the bank that took it over last had their people take everything out.
That story in about 10 minutes on Foreclosing on the American Dream from Michigan Radio. This is Foreclosing on the American Dream from Michigan Radio. I'm Christina Shockley.
You can't keep your home
It's
if you don't have a job.
To go from A1 credit to feeling like you're a failure.
It's hard to even put it into words. It's just so
You grow up a lot
overwhelming.
faster when you
Stress
have
is
to
the
deal with
first
something
thing.
like
A lot
that.
of homeowners will break down, they'll cry. My name is Heather Eleanor Mooney, and I'm a tax and mortgage foreclosure prevention specialist at the Washtenaw County Treasurer's Office. Stress is the first thing that I hear from a lot of homeowners. A lot of homeowners will break down, they'll cry. They go on to talk about usually multiple hardships that they've experienced, because it's not just the isolated instance of foreclosure. There's always some trigger event, some sort of hardship. People have told me they can't sleep. People told me they pulled their hair out. People tell me, even about their bowel movements. I mean, people tell me a lot of information about themselves, but usually it's, I guess, body fallout, if you will, or ailments from so much stress. And I don't have the answers for the bad economy. I don't have the jobs. I don't have a lot of the buyers for the houses, with our high exodus rate. And so that makes it tough when you know that you can see people doing everything they can, and you've tried everything you can, and still, for whatever reason, it's not. There's some light to some end of the tunnel, but I just don't know what that is or why. That makes it harder.
Heather Eleanor Mooney is a foreclosure prevention counselor. As Michigan's foreclosure crisis has gotten worse, more and more groups have been holding forums to help educate people about their options. These sessions have attracted thousands.
The reason why we're here is, we remortgaged at a flexible, adjustable interest rate, and the payment's too high now.
We actually got into a mortgage that we didn't know the terms of. It wasn't what we agreed to prior to closing.
Because we're in the process of losing our home. My husband and I both lost our jobs at the same time. When we purchased our home, we were making over $100,000 a year. Now we're lucky to make $50,000.
Some of these forums were put on by government officials. But up until a few months ago, that was the only assistance the state had for borrowers in trouble. Rick Pluta takes a look at how Michigan's government has been responding.
The state's foreclosure crisis not only threw thousands of people out of their homes, it also helped stall Michigan's long-hoped-for economic rebound. Nationwide, people stopped buying new cars and trucks, and state leaders, including Governor Granholm, who were hoping to see the beginnings of a recovery in 2009, instead saw their ambitions dashed.
Certainly the contraction in our auto industry has meant that the economic challenges for real families have layered upon this foreclosure crisis and caused us to be in a uniquely challenged position.
Lansing felt the pressure to act. The state is now requiring lenders to be licensed, and lenders who've been barred from doing business in other states won't be allowed to sell loans in Michigan. And last October, Governor Granholm called for a new program to help borrowers who'd run into trouble refinance. Democrats and Republicans in the legislature agreed and enacted the Save the Dream program. It allows the Michigan State Housing Development Authority to offer below-market fixed-rate mortgages to people who could no longer afford their adjustable loans. Governor Granholm and Democrats also want to punish lenders who steer customers to loans that they don't need or are more expensive than they should be, or if they sell mortgages without making sure their customers can afford them.
That is absurd, it's wrong, and that's part of what has to happen next is to ban that kind of predatory lending.
Democratic State Representative Steve Tabachman of Detroit says 24 other states have adopted similar measures.
Certain loans, certain products are so dangerous and so predatory that they either ought to be banned or they ought to be highly regulated.
But that's where bipartisan cooperation ended. The State House has passed those bills, and now they are before the Republican-controlled state Senate.
Can you talk to your senator right now and tell him to pass this right quick on the phone? We got him on the phone.
All right, so I'm going to dial. What city do you live in?
In Royal Oak, volunteers from the activist group Acorn are walking the city's downtown business district, handing people cell phones and asking them to call their Republican state senator.
The senator's office, your senator is Papa George, and this is
The activists are trying to build pressure on the Senate leadership to hold a vote.
My name is Sabrina Smith, and I live in Royal Oak, and I'm calling him to urge and pass the anti-predatory lending bills so that I can have protection from loan abuses.
But Senate Republicans say all of that would be a reckless overreaction to the crisis.
You know, somebody's going to have to pay for these punitive measures, and it's going to be the people that need capital, the people that need to borrow.
State Senator Randy Richardville.
And if we make it tougher for them to be able to get capital and invest in their homes and invest in their businesses in Michigan, it's going to be worse on the economy and not better.
In fact, it's generally agreed that the foreclosure crisis is too big for a state policy to cure. That will be up to the economy and creating jobs that will allow people to afford house payments. Economists say it will probably be 2 years at the earliest before Michigan is once again creating more jobs than it is losing. At the state capitol, I'm Rick Pluta.
While everyone hopes and waits for an economic turnaround, groups across Michigan are doing what they can to help in the meantime. In Benzie County, one group is doing everything from helping people get their finances in order to actually buying foreclosed properties. Steve Carmody reports.
Benzie Housing Council, this is Laura. How may I help you?
The telephone rings constantly at the Benzie Housing Council. Business is so good, the little nonprofit housing agency even cut a hole in a wall into the office space next door just to have enough room. Among the people at the strip mall office on this day is Ann. Ann's not her real name, but Ann's problem is very real. She and her husband bought a home 2 years ago, only to see their income drop by 2/3 as Michigan's economy has tanked.
The first time I talked to somebody at our mortgage company, I had told them, this is our home. We want to stay here. We want to stay in the county. And, we want our kids and grandkids to grow up there. But that didn't seem to help them.
Ann and her husband turned to the Benzie Housing Council for help 6 months ago. The agency keeps the bank at bay as they try to restructure their mortgage. Ann and her husband are also getting counseling on how to better manage their money. John O'Neill is the head of the Benzie Housing Council. He says the agency uses a variety of tactics, including helping homeowners on the brink of foreclosure to renegotiate to get more affordable mortgage payments.
3 years ago, if we had gone to the big lenders and said, look, why don't you offer this loan modification, they would have laughed us off, off the telephone line. But some of these big companies, many of them, are in worse shape than our own individual home buyers. And they realize that in order to save their skin, they need to negotiate.
Angie Gabo is the executive director of the Community Economic Development Association of Michigan, or CEDM. CEDM is an umbrella organization that assists local groups trying to improve communities in Michigan. Gabo notes the Benzie Housing Council is operating in a rural region with relatively few homes in foreclosure. Gabo is doubtful it would be financially possible to duplicate the same aggressive approach in parts of Michigan where the number of foreclosed homes is in the thousands.
That is the big question, is in communities where you've got just lower numbers. It's an easier problem to probably map out how we're gonna coordinate all of the different services that are required and put the kind of time into each individual family.
John O'Neill has heard the skepticism before, but he insists the Benzie Housing Council's aggressive approach is worth replicating around the state, though even he sounds a cautious note about the future.
We're trying to design this in a way that it can be sustainable, because we have noticed, you can hear the phones ringing. We're getting more and more people calling with more and more problems.
CEDM's Angie Gabo says her group hopes to raise several $1 million a year to combat foreclosures. She agrees, given the size of Michigan's foreclosure problem, that may sound like tossing a life ring to someone who needs a life raft, but it may end up keeping a few more people afloat. I'm Steve Carmody in Benzie County.
A vacant home can blemish a tidy block almost overnight, with fast-growing weeds and front porches littered with handbills. Some neighbors ignore those signs of abandonment, but others pull the weeds and pick up the trash. Sarah Hewlett visited one block in Detroit where foreclosures have made active neighbors even more committed to where they live.
There are 4 foreclosed homes on this block of Shaftesbury Avenue in northwest Detroit, but you have to look closely to figure out which ones. Tom Blazer has been here a long time, since 1960. He looks out over a green, neatly trimmed lawn.
I have it mowed every other week, and of course those are the trees I planted.
But the trees, the green grass, and the neatly sculpted shrubs are not in front of Blazer's house. They're next door, at a house that sat vacant for months.
A nice couple had bought it, and they did quite a bit on it. They had put the new furnace in, and they put the new roof on, and all those things. But then I think they lost the house.
The house was empty over the winter when a pipe burst. Blazer says the water ran for 10 days before someone came out to shut it off. He stands on the porch and peers through the front windows. The water has washed all the plaster from the walls.
But you can see we're down to the left and, no plaster, down to the left and down to the subfloor.
Blazer says he hopes someone buys and restores the 1920s brick colonial. He says last he checked, it was on the market for $20,000. That's in a neighborhood where homes can sell for 10 times that amount. In the meantime, he says he'll keep cutting the grass and trimming the bushes.
It doesn't bother me. I sort of enjoy it, really. And it sort of gives you that feeling you have a little control over something that you really don't have control of.
Blazer isn't the only homeowner on this block who's taken on the upkeep of orphaned homes. Down the street, Marcia Brune and her neighbors have been keeping the yard neat and the litter picked up at the empty house next door to hers.
And at one point, we even went in and put shades at all the windows so that the house would look occupied. Unfortunately, the bank that took it over last had their people take everything out, so they took out all the shades.
Brune says that's when the break-in started.
And I got angry at that point. That, how can people just come into our neighborhood and just do this to us? I began to take it personally. And that's really when I decided I was going to, do something about it as an individual.
What Brune decided to do was buy the house and remodel it from top to bottom.
The kitchen has been completely gutted. It was an old kitchen. I've taken out all the cabinets, all the soffits. And I have a new cherry kitchen coming with a granite countertop.
Brune got the house for less than $35,000, but she says she's not in it to flip it for a quick profit. She says saving this house will help protect her home value and keep her neighborhood from getting sucked into the downward slide that's claimed many other parts of Detroit.
I have a real commitment to this neighborhood, having lived in this neighborhood 30 years. And I have this wonderful house. It's practically one of a kind. And wonderful neighbors and committed neighbors. And the fact that, I know how hard people work throughout this neighborhood to keep it viable.
Back down the street, Tom Blazer says he does not plan to take the ambitious path Marcia Brune did with the house next door to him. But if you ask him if he'd ever leave this block, maybe for a condo without the yard work, his answer is quick and definitive.
No, never. No.
In fact, Blazer recently picked up the lawn mowing duties at another vacant house on the next block.
If I'm on a sinking ship, I don't want it to go down.
In Detroit, I'm Sarah Hewlett.
can't keep your home
It's
if you don't have a job.
To go from A1 credit to feeling like you're a failure.
It's hard to even put it into words. It's just so
You grow up a lot
overwhelming.
faster when you have to deal with something like that.
A lot of homeowners will break down, they'll cry.
My name is Regina Myrie. I lost my home in 2007. My husband passed away in January of 2006. We were married for about 3 months, and due to funeral expenses and everything else, I literally exhausted all available monies that I had. I even tried to do bankruptcy to try to save my home. I wasn't eligible for Chapter 7. In order for me to do Chapter 13, that left me with no money to even pay utilities or for an emergency. So I had no choice but to come to the reality that there's no longer that I could afford this home and that I had to bail out. It's hard for a person to go from A1 credit to feeling like you're a failure and just to try to keep your head up and just to know that this is just temporary. It's not going to be this way always. But right now I'm at a point where I know that there are other homeowners that are out there facing the exact same thing. I just want them now to be more informed and to understand that now, because there are others who have lost homes, they're now opening the doors for more options for others to try to save their homes. And home ownership is one of the most prized investments a person can have. And for those that are out there, I just don't want them to give up, and that there are people out there that can help you, honest people. It's not the things that we possess that makes us. It's not the titles and the positions. It is who you are, your character, and what you're demonstrating to others.
Regina Myrie lives in Ypsilanti. Although it might be hard to perceive if you're going through foreclosure, there are some silver linings to this crisis. Groups have formed across the nation to help people not only with finances, but also with the emotional side of foreclosure. Even though the economy is struggling, some businesses, such as repossession companies, are booming, and the crisis has led to some great deals on property. Still, the foreclosure crisis has affected thousands of people negatively, and in many cases has created financial, emotional, and physical upheaval. If you're worried about the terms of your mortgage, or if you're facing foreclosure, there are a number of resources and groups that can help. Visit our website, michiganradio.org, for more information. Foreclosing on the American Dream was produced by Tamar Charney. Vincent Duffy was the story editor. Reporting by Steve Carmody, Dustin Dwyer, Jennifer Guerra, Sarah Hewlett, Rick Pluta, and Tracy Samilton. Essay by Jack Lessenberry. Production assistance from Zoe Clark, Richie Duchan, and Catherine Gorman. Special thanks to indie bands Emancipator, A Setting Sun, and Talk Fine for use of their music. I'm Christina Shockley. This documentary is a production of Michigan Radio, a broadcasting service of the University of Michigan.